Living in Massachusetts, or even just being from this area, you get to see that there is a lot of stuff and a lot of history that comes with the Boston Commons. It's a very, very unique spot because technically the Boston Commons was actually the first ever public park that was allowing of people to just roam free. It is something that you will see people just roaming around almost every hour of the day besides nighttime and maybe even during the nighttime. To be honest, I'm kind of here late, so I would say this is definitely something that's very, very well known to anyone who grew up in Massachusetts. But do you know the history of this place? Do you know the dark side of this place? Let's get into it. As I mentioned before, it is actually the first public park in America. This was the first public park, and the reason why they actually made this was for a place to just come and relax a little bit. Of course, there was some other things that played into why they actually built this and made it even exist in the first place, but it was technically a spot where they would have open pastures. They used to have farming. They used to have animals that would come, well, that were here, and it was just a public area for the people. But one thing that a lot of people don't really know about is the great elm tree. It's actually right over here. The Puritans were the ones that owned the area, and they actually used the great elm tree as a place to punish people who got convicted of different crimes that seemed to be worthy enough of them to be hanged. So the great elm tree was a spot where they used to hang people, and that is obviously not something that they're doing here now, but it was a spot where they hung some people who didn't necessarily seem like they were worthy of being put to death. So let's get into that. Some of the criminals actually include a British commander or a British official who technically was just used as a act of protest. They ended up hanging this man just as a form of protest, and obviously that doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. It doesn't seem like it is the best way of going about it. I forgot to mention it. The act of protest when they actually killed the British official was a act of protest for them against the Stamp Act. Obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense to anyone who has logic in their brain, but they did it in an act of protest in the Stamp Act, which doesn't make it any much better, but wanted to piece that in real quick before I move past this part. One of the other people was someone who was supposedly a witch. That is something that obviously you can't really prove, but at that time there was this very interesting situation where there was supposedly bread that was long past its due date. It was long past its expiration date, and it was growing some sort of mold or something. I could put a clip up to the side, but supposedly it was making people actually trip out, and that was the reason for the witches, supposedly. Who knows? As we know now, there was a lot of people that used different reasons to say this person isn't this or this person is that. So it was definitely something that I thought was very interesting to see, that they were actually willing to hang someone in the Boston Commons just for that. Of course, there was many more people. There was actually supposedly 45 Native Americans who were just hung by this tree as, I assume, a retaliation of war, but there was more people. There was plenty of other people Some that were just criminals that obviously I don't think any real crime is deserving of that, but who knows, I don't know. At that time, people were trying to set examples. They were trying to make examples of all sorts of things, and one of the interesting ones was this lady who was supposedly a pirate. She was supposedly a pirate, and then she came back and killed her husband. I don't know. Seems very interesting. I don't know. The whole pirate situation in that story to me seems a little too good to be true, but I'm probably being a little bit too questionable. I'm probably questioning things when I maybe shouldn't. With that said, though, this is a very horrific spot, to be honest. This is very interesting because a lot of people definitely don't know the history of that old tree and the significance it plays in our history today. Of course, the Boston Commons has a lot more history to it, though. So let's get into it. One thing I forgot to mention is that the Boston Commons is actually supposedly a huge burial site. This is a place where they used to bury poor people, sick people, and just criminals that they didn't necessarily think should be buried in the same exact spots that the more luxury people were buried. If you go right up the street, there is a few other burial spots, and these are more historical spots that are marked graves. It is definitely more high-end, you could say, but they also have another burial spot within the Boston Commons that is marked graves as well. So it is just very creepy and very interesting to see that some of the spots within this place are just not marked supposedly, and they did a huge dig underneath the grounds when they were building the subway system. They ended up finding thousands of bodies. They found thousands of bodies, and that was just in one spot that they ended up digging up. So that leads us to believe that there is probably countless more throughout this whole area. And one thing that I thought was really, really weird is supposedly people were selling the bones. At one point, people were selling the bones and making some money off of it, which is just wild. I don't know who would buy bones, who would sell bones, and why is there a demand for it? Who knows? I just thought that this was creepy enough to add into here because I wasn't even really aware of this until I started doing research on the editing part where I'm actually piecing it all together. So this I just felt like was too weird to not add in. Over in these Boston Commons, they also had a shooting squad. They also had gallows. The shooting squad is something that I thought was very interesting for them to have here. It makes some sense because there's a lot of hills, there's a lot of areas that are I guess they could be like a backstop for something like that, but it also just doesn't make a lot of sense to me because having something like that just obviously is going to put a lot of other people at risk. So very interesting in my opinion. I thought it was very interesting to read about that part. I was more surprised to see that than the gallows, which a lot of people would probably be complete opposite. The firing squad and the gallows were actually only set up when the big elm tree fell down. It only fell down because it was old. It just wasn't it wasn't something that they probably were expecting to have around for so long, and the fact that they used it for such evil things was wild that it even lasted so long. So supposedly it lasted about like 200, maybe even longer than that, 200 years or longer than that. But they ended up setting up gallows and a firing squad when the tree fell. So that was something that was just obviously not going to be as long-lived as the tree, but such a wild moment. As you can see, some of these trees have probably been here for a long time, and everything that's here has been around here for a long time. It's going to be here for a long time as well. But when we see the firing squad, we see all of these different forms of real pain. It is a blessing to see what it has come to. Of course, this is a video about me detailing the dark side of the Boston Commons, and I feel like I've done a decent job of that so far. But one thing I wanted to highlight at the end is they also do have this very dope thing called the Boston Freedom Rally, which is something that they have every September. It's on the third Saturday of every September, and it gets to honor this, which through all the pain and the suffering that's happened here, I feel as if this is probably the best spot to have it. It's went from a place of torture to a place of celebrating freedom. So hope everyone enjoyed this. Much love, much respect.